Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The old pickup truck rattled down the winding dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust in its wake. Dense forest pressed in on both sides, creating a tunnel of green that seemed to swallow up the late afternoon sunlight. Behind the wheel, Parker gripped the steering wheel with sweaty palms, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He'd been planning this getaway for months, a chance to finally be alone and explore a side of himself he'd kept hidden for far too long. The worn leather duffel bag on the passenger seat seemed to pulse with possibility. Inside were carefully folded dresses, blouses, and skirts, a secret wardrobe he'd painstakingly collected over the years. As the trees thinned out, a small log cabin came into view. Parker let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. This remote hideaway would be his sanctuary for the next 3 days. No prying eyes, no judgment, just the freedom to be himself. Or rather, herself. He pulled up in front of the cabin and cut the engine. For a moment, he simply sat there, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then, grabbing his bags, he climbed out of the truck and made his way to the front door. The cabin was rustic, but cozy, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall of the main room. Parker did a quick tour, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, before returning to the living area. He set his bags down and walked to the large picture window overlooking the forest. Dozens of miles of wilderness stretched out before him. The thought of such isolation was both thrilling and slightly unnerving, but it was exactly what he needed, a chance to strip away the layers of expectation and conformity that had suffocated him for so long. Parker took a deep breath, savoring the quiet. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no coworkers. Just the whisper of the wind through the trees and the occasional bird call. He felt the tension in his shoulders begin to unwind. Turning back to his bags, he unzipped the duffel containing his feminine attire. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted out a silky emerald green blouse. The fabric shimmered in the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. He held it up to his chest, imagining how it would feel against his skin. A thrill of excitement coursed through him. Here, in this secluded cabin, he could finally give life to the persona he'd only dreamed about. Parker stripped off his t-shirt and jeans, tossing them carelessly aside. Standing in just his boxers, he slipped the blouse over his head. The cool silk settled against his skin, igniting nerve endings he didn't know he had. He smoothed his hands down the front, marveling at how right it felt. Next came a flowing black skirt that swished tantalizingly around his legs. He twirled experimentally, watching the fabric billow out. A giggle escaped his lips, a higher, more feminine sound than he was used to hearing from himself. He padded to the bathroom, heart racing. The moment of truth. Parker gazed at his reflection in the mirror above the sink. The man he normally saw was still there, but softened somehow. More delicate. More herself. From his toiletry bag, he withdrew an assortment of makeup. He'd practiced in secret for months, watching countless tutorials. Now his hands moved with surprising confidence as he applied foundation, blush, eyeshadow, and mascara. A swipe of red lipstick completed the transformation. Paige, stared at herself in awe. The person gazing back was undeniably feminine, with smoky eyes and high cheekbones. She hardly recognized herself. "Hello, Paige," she whispered, and her reflection smiled back. Paige spent the next hour exploring the cabin as if seeing it through new eyes. She ran her hands along the rough-hewn logs of the walls, relishing the contrast against her manicured nails. In the kitchen, she opened a bottle of white wine and poured herself a glass, sipping delicately as she perused the bookshelves in the living room. She selected a romance novel, the kind of book Parker would never have been caught dead reading, and curled up on the plush sofa. As she lost herself in the story, Paige felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was who she was meant to be. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, Paige's stomach growled. She realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast. Setting aside her book, she made her way to the kitchen to see what provisions she'd brought. Humming softly to herself, Paige began preparing a simple pasta dish. She moved gracefully around the small kitchen, hips swaying to music only she could hear. The domestic task felt natural, as if she'd been doing it her whole life. While the pasta boiled, she stepped out onto the back porch to watch the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the trees. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Paige closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling more at peace than she had in years. Back inside, she plated her meal and poured another glass of wine. Rather than eat at the small dining table, Paige curled up on the sofa again, balancing the plate on her lap. She savored each bite, washing it down with sips of crisp Chardonnay. As she ate, Paige's mind wandered to the hike she had planned for tomorrow. She'd chosen this particular cabin for its proximity to several scenic trails. The thought of exploring the wilderness as her true self sent a thrill of excitement through her. After finishing her meal, Paige cleaned up the kitchen, enjoying the domestic routine. She then drew herself a bath, adding a capful of lavender-scented bubble bath to the steaming water. Slipping out of her clothes, she eased into the tub with a contented sigh. The hot water soothed away the last of the tension from the long drive. Paige closed her eyes, letting her mind drift. She thought about her life back in the city, the pressure to conform, to be the man everyone expected her to be. Here, surrounded by nothing but nature, those expectations felt a million miles away. As the water began to cool, Paige reluctantly got out of the tub. She dried off and slipped into a silky nightgown, reveling in the feel of the fabric against her smooth skin. Padding back to the bedroom, she crawled under the covers and picked up her book again. The combination of wine, warm bath, and soft bed soon had Paige's eyelids drooping. She marked her place in the book and set it on the nightstand. Turning off the lamp, she snuggled down into the blankets. In the darkness, listening to the nighttime sounds of the forest, Paige felt a profound sense of contentment wash over her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly, authentically, herself. With a smile on her lips, she drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Paige awoke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. For a moment, she was disoriented, not recognizing her surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and a smile spread across her face. She stretched languidly, enjoying the feel of the silky nightgown against her skin. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine through the open window. Paige could hear birds chirping outside, a welcome change from the usual urban cacophony that greeted her mornings in the city. Throwing back the covers, she padded to the bathroom to freshen up. As she washed her face, removing the remnants of yesterday's makeup, Paige studied her reflection. Even without the cosmetic enhancements, she could see the woman within struggling to emerge. Back in the bedroom, Paige opened her duffel bag and considered her options. Today was all about exploring the wilderness, so practicality had to take precedence over fashion. She selected a pair of yoga pants and a fitted t-shirt, items that Parker would wear for a hike, but that still felt feminine to Paige. She applied a light layer of makeup, just enough to enhance her features, without being impractical for outdoor activities. A swipe of tinted lip balm completed the look. Paige smiled at her reflection, feeling pretty, yet prepared for a day of adventure. In the kitchen, she prepared a hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. As she ate, Paige reviewed the trail map she'd brought along. She'd chosen a moderate 5-mile loop that promised stunning views of the surrounding mountains. After cleaning up from breakfast, Paige packed a small backpack with water, snacks, and other hiking essentials. She laced up her hiking boots. Thankfully, Parker's shoe size wasn't too large for more feminine styles, and stepped out into the bright morning sunshine. The trail began just behind the cabin, a narrow path winding its way into the dense forest. Paige took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the clean mountain air. With a sense of excitement and freedom, she set off down the trail. The first part of the hike was a gentle incline through towering pines. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Paige moved at a steady pace, her boots crunching on the carpet of pine needles. As she walked, Paige felt a profound sense of connection with her surroundings. The forest seemed to embrace her, accepting her for who she truly was. There was no judgment here, no expectations to live up to. She could simply be. About an hour into the hike, the trail began to climb more steeply. Paige's breathing grew heavier, and she could feel sweat beading on her forehead. But the exertion felt good, invigorating. She pushed on, knowing the view at the top would be worth it. Finally, the trees began to thin, and Paige emerged onto a rocky outcropping. The view took her breath away. Mountains stretched as far as the eye could see, their peaks shrouded in mist. A valley lay below, a patchwork of green forest and meadows, with a silver ribbon of river winding through it. Paige found a flat rock to sit on and took a long drink from her water bottle. As she caught her breath, she let her gaze wander over the magnificent landscape before her. In that moment, she felt more alive and more herself than she ever had before. She pulled out her phone to snap a few pictures, wishing she could share this moment with someone. But then she reminded herself that this journey was about self-discovery. She needed this time alone to fully embrace her true identity. After resting for a while and having a snack, Paige began the descent back to the cabin. The return trip seemed to go by faster, and before she knew it, she was emerging from the forest into the small clearing where the cabin stood. Back inside, Paige kicked off her boots and headed straight for the shower. The hot water soothed her tired muscles, washing away the sweat and dust from the trail. As she lathered her body, Paige marveled at how different it felt in this feminine persona. Every touch, every sensation seemed heightened. After her shower, Paige took her time getting ready for the evening. She chose a floral sundress from her collection, relishing the way the light fabric swirled around her legs. She applied her makeup with care, creating a softer, more romantic look than the previous night. In the kitchen, Paige uncorked another bottle of wine and began preparing dinner. She'd brought ingredients to make her favorite dish, a creamy mushroom risotto. As she stirred the rice, adding ladles of hot broth, Paige hummed softly to herself. The domestic task felt natural, as if she'd been doing it her whole life. With dinner simmering on the stove, Paige stepped out onto the back porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. She sipped her wine, reflecting on the day's adventures and the profound sense of peace she felt. Back inside, Paige plated her risotto and settled onto the sofa. As she ate, she picked up the romance novel she'd started the night before. The story of love and self-discovery resonated with her in a way it never had when she was living as Parker. After dinner, Paige cleaned up the kitchen and poured herself another glass of wine. She put on some soft music and began to sway to the melody. Alone in the cabin, she let herself move freely, embracing the feminine grace she'd always felt inside but never allowed herself to express. As the night wore on, Paige found herself growing introspective. She curled up in an armchair by the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. Out here, away from the noise and distractions of the city, she could finally hear the voice of her true self. She thought about her life back home, the constant pressure to conform, to be the man everyone expected her to be. Paige realized how much energy she'd been expending to maintain that facade. Here, in this secluded cabin, she felt truly free for the first time. But with that freedom came questions. How could she integrate this part of herself into her everyday life? Would her friends and family ever understand? The thought of going back to living as Parker full-time filled her with a sense of dread. Paige took a deep breath, reminding herself that she didn't need to figure everything out right now. This weekend was about exploration and self-discovery. She had one more full day to embrace her true self before facing the real world again. With that thought, Paige decided to turn in for the night. She changed into a silky nightgown and slipped between the cool sheets. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of anticipation for what the next day might bring. The following morning, Paige awoke to the sound of rain pattering against the cabin roof. She lay in bed for a while, listening to the soothing rhythm and breathing in the fresh, damp air coming through the open window. Eventually, she rose and went to the window. The forest was shrouded in mist, giving it an ethereal quality. While the rain put a damper on any hiking plans, Paige found she didn't mind. A day spent indoors, fully embracing her feminine side, sounded perfect. After a leisurely breakfast, Paige decided to use the rainy day as an opportunity to experiment more with her look. She laid out all of her clothes and makeup on the bed, feeling like a kid in a candy store. She started with a full skincare routine, something Parker had never bothered with. The process of cleansing, toning, and moisturizing felt like a form of self-care, a way of honoring her true self. Next came makeup. Paige took her time, carefully applying foundation, contouring her cheeks, and creating a smoky eye look she'd been wanting to try. She lined her lips and applied a bold red lipstick, then stood back to admire the effect. The woman in the mirror looked confident and completely at ease with herself. For clothing, Paige chose a form-fitting black dress. She'd never had the courage to wear it before, even in private. But today, it felt right. She added a pair of kitten heels and some simple jewelry to complete the look. Fully dressed, Paige twirled in front of the full-length mirror, watching the dress flare out around her. She felt beautiful, powerful, and most importantly, like her true self. For the first time, the external image matched the person she'd always known she was inside. As the rain continued to fall outside, Paige spent the day fully immersed in her feminine persona. She painted her nails, tried out different hairstyles, and even practiced walking in higher heels. Each activity felt like a celebration of her identity, a way of making up for lost time. In the afternoon, Paige curled up on the sofa with her book and a cup of herbal tea. The soft patter of rain against the windows created a cozy atmosphere. As she read, Paige found herself identifying strongly with the female protagonist, understanding her thoughts and feelings in a way Parker never could have. As evening approached, Paige realized this was her last night at the cabin. Tomorrow she would have to return to the city, to her job, to the expectations of others. The thought filled her with a mix of sadness and anxiety. She poured herself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the covered porch. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the forest smelled fresh and clean. Paige leaned against the railing, sipping her wine and contemplating the future. Could she find a way to incorporate Paige into her everyday life? The thought of going back to living exclusively as Parker felt suffocating. But she also knew the world wasn't always kind to people who didn't fit neatly into predetermined boxes. Paige thought about her friends and family. Would they understand if she tried to explain how she felt? Or would they reject her, unable to see past the person they thought they knew? As she stood there, lost in thought, a sense of resolution began to form. This weekend had shown her who she truly was, and she wouldn't simply shove that realization back into the closet. Somehow, she would find a way to be true to herself, whatever that might mean. Back inside, Paige decided to make her last night special. She prepared an elaborate dinner, set the table with care, and even lit some candles. As she ate, she made a silent toast to herself, to Paige, and to the journey of self-discovery she'd embarked upon. After dinner, Paige put on some music and danced around the living room, letting herself move freely and expressively. She laughed out loud at the joy of it, at the simple pleasure of being herself without fear or inhibition. As the night wore on, Paige began to pack up her things. She carefully folded each item of clothing, each one a testament to her true identity. Packing felt like saying goodbye, not just to the cabin, but to the freedom she'd experienced here. But as she zipped up her bag, Paige made a promise to herself. This wouldn't be the end. Somehow, some way, she would find a way to be Paige in her everyday life. The details were hazy, the path uncertain, but the determination was there. Paige fell asleep that night with a mixture of sadness and hope swirling in her heart. The weekend had been transformative, showing her a version of herself she'd only dreamed of before. As she drifted off, she held on to that vision of her true self, determined not to let it fade away in the harsh light of day.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!